Hello everyone, Lore Master of Sotek here, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about something very important. Because if there's one thing everyone loves in fantasy settings, it is horrifically powerful artifacts that grant godlike abilities but come with corruptive influence. The Ring of Sauron and the Sword of Khaine being the most well known to those of you watching, I imagine. The Widowmaker has already arrived in the Total War series during Total War Warhammer 2 and has delighted players by offering a weapon of ultimate power for those willing to pursue it. However, as you might have guessed by the title and thumbnail, the Widowmaker is not the only artifact of godlike power to be found in the Warhammer world. It may be the most powerful weapon, but what about magical items that aren't weapons? Hidden deep beneath the Howling Hills in the Central Empire, there lies a runic artifact of unspeakable power known as only the Nemesis crown. Let's start off with a healthy dose of lore. The Nemesis crown was forged not long after the founding of the Empire by none other than Alaric the Mad, one of the greatest rune lords to ever grace the Dwarven realms. It was Alaric who crafted the legendary rune fangs, the 12 sacred blades that represent the power and authority of the Elector Counts in the Empire of Sigmar. The rune fangs were an achievement the likes of which even the most esteemed rune lords could only dream of accomplishing, and thus many in the Karaz Ankor spoke of how Alaric had clearly reached his peak. However, the century he spent forging these masterpieces is said to have driven the ancient dwarf to paranoia and obsession. Alaric refused to accept that he had reached the height of his craft, stubbornly assuring himself that he could push the art of runesmithing even further. So, this revered ancestor of Karaz delved deeper than ever before into runic lore, in the hopes of discovering ancient runes bearing power that even the rune fangs would pale against. Eventually, he succeeded, finding long-forgotten records detailing the creation of a rune related to Za, the ruling rune, also known as the Master Rune of Kingship. This rune is inscribed upon the dragon crown of Karaz, worn by the High King of Karaz since the Hold's founding. The true power belonging to the Master Rune of Kingship is that it retains and distills the wisdom of each bearer to be passed down to those that follow. Truly an incredible power. However, the rune that Alaric discovered was not the Master Rune of Kingship, but instead a variation, known as the Master Rune of Ages. According to the few remaining scraps of ancient lore on this rune, passed down from the lost hold of Karak Zorn, this rune performed the same function as the Rune of Kingship with one additional effect. It would grant the bearer control over their very destiny. He who wielded the Rune of Ages would become the master of his fate, and that of his entire race. If this rune could truly be forged, it would unleash a power so great that even the dark gods of chaos would quail in fear. For not even the gods can truly control the tides of fate. However, the Rune of Ages had never been successfully created, even during the days when the ancestor gods walked among their children and the dwarfs enjoyed the fruits of creation before the arrival of chaos. Alaric soon discovered why, as any material he set the Rune of Ages upon would shatter as the last blow was struck. Stone, iron, gromril, dragon scales all proved too fragile to contain the vast energies of Alaric's new Master Rune. Frustrated by these failures, the Rune Lord stubbornly set out alone on a quest to discover a substance strong enough to bear the rune's immense power. For decades, he wandered the old world's roads through forests and mountains, yet nothing he found proved suitable for his grand work. As years dragged by, Alaric's obsession deepened into madness, which led to him being known as the Mad by men and dwarfs, forever tainting his legacy. One fateful day, however, as Alaric traveled what is known modernly as the Old Forest Road in the Empire, he was ambushed by a swarm of Skaven. Although stooped with age, he was a storied veteran and made short work of the verminous wretches. As he stood among the ruin of his foes, Alaric felt a powerful force acting on the winds of magic nearby, but more importantly, sensed a peculiar ore from the same source. Following his uncanny instincts honed from centuries of runesmithing, Alaric discovered a crudely dug tunnel leading deep into the earth beneath a horrifically twisted oak. It was there that he found a large chunk of Warpstone, the corruptive essence of dark magic made manifest into a black stone that emits an eerie greenish glow. This is what he had been looking for all these years. Alaric knew well the dangers of Warpstone, but his reason had long given out beneath the weight of obsession. He pried the load from the earth and immediately set off for the Grey Mountains, where in secret he built a mighty forge fueled by the volcanic lifeblood of the peaks. Here, Alaric worked day and night upon the weirdling ore without rest, until he had produced a gleaming crown, upon which he struck the master rune of ages. The Nemesis crown had at last been complete. As Alaric the Mad looked upon his creation, his mind cleared at last. In his obsession and madness, he had failed to realize the corruptive effect of Warpstone upon the Rune of Ages. The crown would not distill the destiny of the wearer to control of their own will, but would instead draw out even the smallest shred of cruelty and transform them into the vessel for all the malice of every former wearer. It would grant this individual unspeakable power. If its power could be mastered, there would be no limit to the strength it could grant. Alaric was horrified by what he had forged, but knew the power of the rune would prevent any attempts made to destroy it. That left only one option. So the Rune Lord took the crown into the great forest within the Empire and made haste to the windswept region known as the Howling Hills. Here he ventured into the depths of a worked-out dwarf mine that had been abandoned even before the War of Vengeance against the elves millennia ago. Within its depths, he hewed from the rock a chamber within which to contain his creation, and sealed it with the most powerful runes of warding and concealment known to the Dawi. There it remained for many centuries, until recently, when a large earthquake cracked open the Howling Hills to expose seams of Gromril and a mysterious hidden chamber. The Nemesis crown had been revealed. That's the overall origin tale of the Nemesis crown. The campaign that took place to claim it was a thing in its own timeline, and heavily featured around the Greenskins under Grimgor Ironhide, the dwarfs with Thorgrim Grudgebearer, and the Empire rallied beneath Karl Franz. Of course, all of the races in the world were involved in some fashion in this contest to claim or somehow deal with the crown, even including the enigmatic lizardmen and the cruel chaos dwarfs. Hence why I think it would make for an excellent super item to be added to Total War Warhammer. It would almost assuredly be represented as an enchanted item, which could offer up the hilarious idea of a lord acquiring both the Nemesis crown and the Sword of Khaine, because why not? In any event, as to what exactly the Nemesis crown should do, I must admit that I've been kind of struggling with this one a bit. It should obviously offer some rather insane bonuses in both battle and campaign, but needs to come at some notable cost like the Widowmaker does. Also, just like with the Sword of Khaine, I think it would be better to have it start off as a reasonably powerful item, but it grows in strength the longer it is possessed by a single character. The best way I could think to represent an item that allows one to control their own fate for themselves and their race is perhaps in battle it could grant the bearer like a notable ward save to kind of represent them being able to avoid things that could potentially kill them or harm them, and also grant them unbreakable as a trait because, you know, they have full control of their destiny, they fear nothing, and it's kind of affecting their minds. Perhaps as you hold on to the item for longer and it grows in strength. The ward save could get higher. The Unbreakable could start to affect your faction instead of just the character. So they get perhaps an aura that grants the Unbreakable ability, or it turns into an active ability they could use on other units to make them unbreakable. And it should grant the bearer terror as well. The crown, the thing about the Nemesis crown that makes it particularly difficult is, despite the fact it featured as the main catalyst for this big campaign, it didn't ever have any actual rules. It's just kind of talked about, and it does appear a few times throughout its own story, but every time it appears, basically it's always being worn by a night goblin, because there's a bunch of night goblins that find it and they keep putting it on their heads, and then some other night goblin usually kills that night goblin and steals it for himself. So it's like constantly going from goblin to goblin. And what we know about the crown is that when you put it on your head, you start getting surrounded by like an aura of just utter oppressive malice, and all of the like evil that all the prior bearers had starts flowing into you, and you become this terrifying entity that causes people around them to go insane. There are even a bunch of dwarfs that initially find the Nemesis crown right after the goblins do, but they basically tear each other apart or are torn apart by the goblins. So even the magically resistant dwarfs aren't able to resist kind of the maddening aura that's unleashed by the crown. So, but trying to distill that into a playable effect is a little tricky. Perhaps it could have some kind of situation where it makes enemies able to be forced into rampage as an active ability, or it has an oppressive aura that heavily debuffs leadership of those nearby. So it's like just a really effective tool for causing lots of mass routes or forcing crumbling on enemies. It's a little tricky for me to think of stuff. Even the campaign map I even find harder, because it's like, okay, if you could control the destiny of your race, perhaps it should grant diplomacy bonuses with the other members of your race, like characters that you could confederate. You know, it allows you to start manipulating them more, so it, you know, increases your diplomacy with your faction, but makes everyone else hate you because you're turning into this horrible tyrannical monstrosity. So, you know, if you're playing the Empire, it makes all the other Empire guys more pliable, but every single other race in the game hates you significantly more because they realize you're a threat. Perhaps it could, like, I feel like with it being able to control things, it's like maybe it should, you know, grant control bonuses, maybe at the first level to your local region or province, but then as it goes up, it eventually becomes perhaps campaign wide. But then how do you represent the debuffs of like the evil of the crown, you know, having an adverse effect and kind of ruining you? You know, this is a crown that, sure, it offers amazing and incredible power, but it's a corruptive influence. It should lead to your downfall rather than your strength if you don't have if you really are not in a perfect place to wield it properly. So I don't know. I would really appreciate some thought bubbles from y'all down in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. How would you represent the Nemesis crown in battles as an item, and as well as what would its effects on the campaign map be? As far as how I would like it to appear in the game, the fun thing about the Nemesis crown is it is very similar in a lot of ways to the ring, in that it should basically, in my opinion, just have the ability to kind of pop up places. So unlike the Sword of Khaine, which always comes from the Shrine of Khaine, the Blighted Isle, and an elf has to draw it, and then once it's been drawn, it can kind of be passed around. I think what would be fun for the Nemesis crown is, because the Empire's a little close to Ulthuan for my liking on Immortal Empires. So what I think would be fun is if you got a narrative event that could pop up randomly, like maybe it doesn't show up for the first 25 turns or something, but basically it shows up and the Nemesis crown appears somewhere random in the world. Like it could appear literally anywhere, but it randomly appears in the world and a rogue army spawns, maybe like a night goblin rogue army, and some kind of like night goblin war boss or goblin great shaman has it, and he's running around causing a ruckus. And if you kill him, you get a prompt to either take the crown for yourself or to hide it away. And if you choose to hide it away, then it goes back underground and doesn't come back for another, I don't know, 25, 30 turns. But if you take it, then your character immediately equips it and it's locked on. And every once in a while, you know, just like the Sword of Khaine, you would get a prompt that you keep the crown on, so it becomes more powerful, but its debuffs become more powerful, or do you give it up and lock it away? And if you kill someone, and the crowns should just function like the Sword of Khaine from that point on, in my opinion, where the bearer hangs on to it until he is defeated in battle. And if you defeat them in battle, you get a dilemma where you can either take the crown or you can choose to basically hide it away. But unlike the Sword of Khaine, which always goes back to the Widowmaker or the shrine, I would have it where the Nemesis crown just randomly pops up places. Maybe the first time it pops up in the Empire. And then after that, it, you know, just randomly rolling the dice, it pops up in Khaine, and then it pops up in Lustria, then it pops up in the Southlands, just to kind of have like a powerful item that shows up in other places. Alternatively, it could just be kind of limited to the old world. Like maybe it always kind of shows up in the Empire or the World's Edge Mountains or Norsca or kind of around that ballpark. And it kind of exists as like the Total War Warhammer 1 super item. And then maybe at some point in the future, they can introduce a third item into the game that shows up in the East, you know, whether that's the Darklands, the Mountains of Morn, Cathay, Endin Koresh, or the Chaos Wastes once we get all those territories. And maybe that could be like a completely different item that's kind of like the grand finale. But because I would love for there to be a powerful item represented in each game. But in any event, let me know what y'all think about that. That's pretty much, I'm not going to drag this video out a ton. I do think the Nemesis crown would make for a spectacular item. It had a very fun kind of narrative little campaign to it. A lot of really fun characters showed up during it. The big three were the ones I talked about earlier, but there were a number of characters that were introduced that were characters of legend or something like that. But they weren't, how relevant they are from a lore perspective is very shaky because they only existed on the Games Workshop website. And the only reason we still have their information is that thankfully some people were smart enough to archive the campaign site before it was taken offline. So we still have their info, but that's the only place to find it. And there are some really fun characters there. I know there are quite a few Chaos Dwarf characters or players, for instance, who really like Rykard the Unbreakable. He is the Chaos Dwarf character for the Nemesis Crown event, but like none of these characters are important to like the narrative of the Nemesis Crown. They were basically just like, hey, if you are playing in this campaign and you're playing this race, here's like kind of a character for you to use who has some kind of unique gimmick. But they weren't terribly important in the grand scheme by any means of the imagination. Like the only actually important characters in the Nemesis Crown campaign were Karl Franz, Grimgor, and Thorgrim. But do let me know what y'all think. Would you like to see the Nemesis Crown added to the game? And if so, what effects would you give it? Kind of based on its storyline and what little we know about its effects. It's kind of open-ended. There's a lot of different ways it could be interpreted. Games Workshop didn't really make any like true art for it. They also didn't give it a playable profile or anything like that. So it is kind of just, you know, go to town with it. How would you want to see like a crown that grants you so much that if you were to fully unlock it, supposedly would grant you so much power that it could threaten the dark gods, which is an obscene amount of power, by the way. But, you know, apparently comes at this horrible kind of stereotypical cost of it brings out the absolute worst in its bearer by infusing them with all the nasty parts of all prior bearers, which as a fun fact about the crown, so like I told you, those three big characters were the ones that wanted it the most and were kind of the main focus of the storyline. But the reason each of them wanted it, so Thorgrim Grudgebearer wanted the crown because he was like, okay, the dwarves made it, so it's the dwarves' responsibility to hide it away to make sure it can never be used and abused, and also to kind of, you know, strike this out from Alaric the Mad's legacy, so maybe he can be more helpfully remembered as just Alaric instead of Alaric the Mad for making this horrible creation. And then Karl Franz wanted it because he didn't actually understand what it really was, because the dwarves refused to talk about it. Karl Franz actually goes out of his way to try and talk to like the dwarf ambassadors and the dwarf artisans that live in Altdorf, and everybody just stonewalls him or basically leaves in the dead of night to avoid talking about it. And so Karl Franz is like, okay, clearly this artifact is super duper powerful. And when he learns what it kind of does, based on some old mythology they have from when Alaric was wandering around the Empire. They kind of piece together that it's extremely powerful. And he goes, okay, so why don't we go claim the crown and we'll give it to the colleges of magic, and maybe they can study it and learn how to utilize its power for the good of the Empire. You know, so rather than someone necessarily just wearing it, maybe we can learn to control it and utilize it some other way. And then I love Grimgor Ironhide's part in the story so much. Grimgor basically learns about it and is like, I want that shiny boss hat because everyone else wants that shiny boss hat. And if I'm wearing it, then everyone's going to come try to fight me. And then I get to fight for eternity. Like, the whole thing is Grimgor is bored out of his mind because he can't find a worthy challenger. So he hopes that if he acquires the Nemesis crown and puts it on his head, that it will make him so kind of infamous and terrifying that only the greatest, strongest creatures and heroes and villains from around the world will constantly come after him and fight him. So he'll basically have endless challengers seeking him out rather than him having to lug around everywhere finding people to fight, which is just perfect and so Grimgor that it hurts. But yeah, anyway, so and for those of you curious how it ends, basically the good guys, like the forces of order, absolutely mop the floor with the bad guys. All of the evil races get absolutely slapped, and the good guys win rather heftily. Karl Franz ends up giving up his aspirations for the crown and instead goes to fight Grimgor Ironhide. The two of them don't actually end up fighting. Unfortunately, that would have been really fun, but basically a big fight is kind of breaking out, and Grimgor's army is about to arrive to smash the Empire, but right around then, Thorgrim Grudgebearer kills the goblin that was wearing the crown and claims it. And when the dwarves get their hands on the crown and the goblin dies, it kind of sends like a weird shockwave of panic through the greenskins. So most of the greenskins run away in terror, except for Grimgor, who stays by himself. And Grimgor is alone against the entire army of Karl Franz and thinks about it, but I guess has kind of a flashback to his fight against good old Archaon's lieutenant and decides, fudge it, I'll be back later. And he does, I can't remember exactly what he does, but he makes some kind of like greenskin equivalent to flipping the bird at Karl Franz, and then he turns around and runs off. And the dwarves claim it. They take it back to Katazakadak, where it is sealed away beneath the Everpeak. And the High Elves send a hilarious missive to Thorgrim, where they're like, hey, we played actually like a really critical role, which they did. They're like, hey, we played a big role in helping you secure the crown, and we literally did everything we could to make sure that you guys got it. Could you maybe consider giving us back the Phoenix crown since we helped you took the Nemesis crown? And the dwarves responded with no. The end. That's quite literally how it ends, is that the Thorgrim basically acknowledges that the elves helped, but refuses to do anything about the fact that the elves helped because dwarves are dwarves. In any event, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know what y'all think down below about the stuff I asked earlier, and I'll talk to y'all later. Thanks for watching. Bye. By the way, this video and all future videos are sponsored, and you may be wondering, who's sponsoring it? Who is Sotek shilling out money for this time? And the answer is me. I'm the one sponsoring it with stuff like this. The Dwarven Brewmaster Co. shirt, which you can buy off my merch store at tavernprince.com, aka Only Slans. And I'll have a link to it down below, and we'll also have something appear on the screen while I'm talking about it, but I'll be doing my best to remember to plug it because I am absolutely dog shit at plugging my own stuff. So please come by the merch store. We have some really badass posters and shirts and other stuff that are fantasy themed, not necessarily all Warhammer fantasy because we have some other stuff too, but most of it's Warhammer related, legally, I should say. So, Warhammer inspired. There we go. So if you have an interest, please check it out. And it's a great way to support the community and also pick yourself up some cool stuff. The shirts are actually super comfortable. They're very soft. I actually wear them on the regular. I've been doing so for months and have just gotten around to plugging. Thank you. Enjoy the video. Bye.